things can eventually be explained. But maybe some facts are in the eye of the beholder. And maybe some explanations are not of this world.
So Joseph remembers hearing his daughter cry out in the dream he had earlier, so he feels the need to run home and check on her.
I told you I was working a case.
Why do you keep lying to me, Joseph?
Ironically, he's not lying this time.
I'm here for a little while and then I gotta go.
When are you coming home?
So even though she's mad at him for being gone so much, she treats his wounds. Despite what an asshole he is, he definitely cares about his daughter, and I get the impression he cares about his wife, too. In fact, this hallucination could be symbolic of how, despite how he doesn't show it with his actions, he doesn't want to hurt her, but he knows he can't help it. Anyway, suddenly there's a call from his mother saying that she had a visit from someone.
Someone that you were looking for, something like that? I think that she said he was some kind of engineer.
He won't tell his wife what's going on, but he gives her a gun and tells her to lock the doors, and then he runs off, leaving them behind.
It's okay, man. It's just
I love my daddy.
His parents are in a convalescent home.
I'm here to see Art and Mary Thorne and their son Joseph.
I didn't know the Thorns had a son.
Is this woman the only receptionist in this place? It seems weird that she'd know off the top of her head which patients had kids and which didn't. Then again, there are a lot of weird things in this movie that will sort of be explained at the end. Anyway, his parents haven't had any previous visitors, but he's not convinced that they haven't, so he makes a beeline for their room. And speaking of weird things...
You guys okay?
Why don't you visit us, Joe? He gets a little worse every day.
Well, apparently he really doesn't visit his parents very often, which suits his character, really. Anyway, there's his daughter screaming again, and he ends up in the bedroom again. It seems that he was intentionally lured out of his parents' room, and now he's locked out. And some horrific sounds begin. Check out how the blood seeps under the door as their screams taper off. That's pretty reminiscent of how the nightclub scene in Hell on Earth ended. I mean, if they were going to reference an earlier Hellraiser movie, I wish they'd picked a better one, but that's still a pretty cool callback to an effective scene. But then, he wakes up in bed from before the phone rang, indicating that the scene with his parents was a dream. But then they end up getting the same phone call.
I think that she said he was some kind of an engineer.
So he's off to the convalescent home again. But this time he tries to bypass the receptionist and is stopped by security.
Yes, we've been expecting you.
However, it turns out that they're missing and the bed is covered in blood. I think we can guess what that gift is. I stand corrected, it's 2 fingers this time. And a clue of where to go next.
Hey! Your wife said you might be here.
Tony catches up with Joseph and tries to convince him to turn himself in, and a scuffle breaks out.
There is no engineer. There's just you.
Basically, Tony thinks that Joseph is the one committing the murders, since they're all linked to him, and he doesn't believe Joseph about the engineer. Can't say I blame him, all things considered.
Do you really think I could do those things?
I don't know, Joseph. You need help, Joe.
Go to hell.
So Joseph ends up going alone, and he ends up in a room where a telescope is set up. And now it's Tony's turn to die, because now he's getting stabbed in the back, literally. Poor Tony. I guess he knows the truth now. 7 days. 6 fingers.
6 murders. Only 4 fingers left.
I was starting to wonder how many fingers that kid had left. Thanks for the update.
What do you want from me?
I want you to go home, detective. Time to go home.
That can't be good. So of course he rushes home and calls in Tony's death on the way. So his daughter's room is empty, but he eventually finds a somewhat familiar-looking rotating pillar. It used to be a lot more gruesome, though.
Welcome home, Detective. takes hours to die from exposure. No one was here to hear them cry.
Either way, this is apparently symbolic of how he abandoned his wife and daughter, left them out in the cold, as it were. Meanwhile, the counselor is taking this a little too well. So the fingerprint had been burned off of each of the previous fingers, but with the one they found with Tony, it wasn't.
What they found doesn't make any sense, though, Joseph, because the child's fingerprint, well, it's yours.
Dun, dun, dun! Also notice that the cross pin on his lapel is upside down. It wasn't before. Nice detail. We're not done learning things about this guy, though.
You even misunderstood me when I told you to go home. I didn't mean this place. I meant your first home.
You were the engineer.
It's as good a name as any.
So are you ready for this twist? Unconvincing CG aside. The counselor was Pinhead the whole time. Not as impressive of an entrance as in previous movies, but not bad either.
What are you?
What I am,
Who I am.
is no concern of yours.
I am not the killer.
To find him, you must go back to the place from which you started.
Go home.
Go home, Joseph. Nobody likes you. So now Joseph has to go back to the house where he grew up. And his old bedroom is the room that he kept ending up in earlier. In fact, that whole dream sequence near the beginning took place in his old house. Anyway, he sees himself as a child and his parents are much younger.
We'll save some of these for your father for when he wakes up from his nap.
Not sure if this is intentional, but the way this room falls apart reminds me of one of the deleted scenes from Hellraiser 2. In any case, the facade falls apart, his younger self disappears.
Don't you visit us, Joe. We never see you anymore.
And he's forced to defend himself against his parents. And now, he's out in the cold. But now it seems that he's getting attacked by everyone who died because of him.
I trusted you.
And once again, he shoots them in self-defense. Now the Cenobites have returned, complete with lesbian wire twin action. And now Joseph has reached his final destination, and everything is about to be revealed. That's a weird effect. I think just a simple theatrical casting of a spotlight on the kid would have been more effective. In fact, that's about to happen with 2 other figures, so I don't know why they didn't do that here too. In any case, he's only got 2 fingers remaining. So Kid Joseph is to Joseph's left. To Joseph's right, the faceless Cenobite appears. And reveals itself to be adult Joseph. And here come the chains. Stigmata again? He doesn't exactly have Christ wounds, but he does look a bit crucified there.
Like a game of chess, perhaps. The pieces move apparently aimlessly, but always towards one single objective.
Leave it to Pinhead to make chess metaphors.
Don't you recognize your own flesh?
Finally, I was starting to think the counter wasn't going to change this time.
I don't understand.
The eternal refrain of humanity. Pleading ignorance, begging for mercy. You have destroyed your own innocence. Allowed your flesh to consume your spirit.
Ah, but he's making up for it now.
This is the hell you have created for yourself. Your flesh is killing your spirit.
With a 3-hit flesh combo.
You have forsaken yourself.
Hooks in the face. I'm not sure if it's a lighting trick or simply the white makeup, but Pinhead nearly looks like he's glowing here. That's pretty cool. Anyway, another finger has been severed and now there's only one left. Those are some very small hooks and some very thick chains. Just compare it to how it looked with Frank at the end of the first movie where it was almost the opposite. And now another quotable line from Pinhead.
Welcome to hell.
But now Joseph wakes up in the motel room with the puzzle box again, and now it seems that everything from that early scene on was a dream. He even touches the prostitute as if to make sure she's real. It seems that Joe has had a Scrooge-like epiphany, and things are going to be different from now on.
Detective Thorne.
But then he gets that phone call from the prostitute again, indicating that he's in a loop.
What's the matter, Joe? You okay?
And he's just like, nope. But there he is in the bathroom again.
Every time I think I'm out, they pull me back in.
I've confronted my own demons. And now the only thing I know for certain is that I will live with them forever.
The end. So that was Hellraiser Inferno. Honestly, you guys, I don't hate this movie. I don't even dislike it. In fact, I think it's pretty good. I mean, okay, this isn't a masterpiece, and some of the symbolism may be a little too on the nose, but I didn't even expect to see this kind of symbolism in a Hellraiser sequel, let alone a straight-to-DVD one. And also, I think some of the subtler symbolism, like stigmata and the upside-down cross and possibly crossroads, is pretty clever. I've seen people compare this movie to Jacob's Ladder in the vein of being a pale imitation, and I guess I can kind of see that. Things start out kind of normal, and then more and more weirdness is revealed, and then at the very end, the big reveal is that none of that was really happening, hence the dreamlike quality of the narrative. Silent Hill Shattered Memories played out in a similar way. A lot of bad horror movies like to use that trope where something horrifying happens to a character, but then it turns out to be a nightmare. It's usually used to shoehorn in a scare without any repercussions. With this movie, it makes sense, since both the character and the viewer are meant to be disoriented. Like I said, nearly this whole movie has a dreamlike or nightmarish quality to it. Speaking of which, I have to love how dark the ending of this movie is. Joseph, however much he may deserve it, is really put through the ringer, and he gradually learns that he was the one who put himself there, and once he realizes that he's been given a second chance, he decides to turn over a new leaf. Seriously, this could have ended like a Christmas Carol. It was said of Joseph Thorne that he knew how to keep Christmas well. But that second chance turns out to be a cruel red herring, and he's stuck reliving that scenario for an eternity, because just learning his lesson wasn't enough. He had to suffer. So says Pinhead. Stephen King was once quoted as saying hell is repetition, and this movie is a pretty good example of that. Sure, there's moments of physical pain and a whole lot of mental anguish like a more traditional hell, but knowing that he'll have to go through it over and over and it'll never end is the worst part. It's one thing to not know what awaits you, but sometimes knowing what's coming and not being able to stop it is worse. By the way, if you're gonna have a Frank XP, this is how to do it. Joseph definitely earns his complete monster badge. We see him stealing drugs from a crime scene and getting it on with a prostitute after telling his wife he has to work late, and then framing his partner for a murder that he could have been suspected of. What makes him interesting is that there are tiny hints of goodness in him. He obviously loves his daughter and even his wife, even if he has a pretty fucked up way of showing it. And he's pretty horrified when he finds out that a child has been kidnapped. So he isn't a complete monster. And hell, the movie gradually veers away from showing us his misdeeds to how badly he's being put through the ringer, so we almost forget what a scumbag he is once it gets close to the end. Which is to show that he's learning from his experience, for all the good it'll do him. One thing I'm a little unsure about is whether or not he actually committed these murders. I always just kind of assumed that thinking he's responsible for these deaths was meant to be part of his punishment for stealing from crime scenes, cheating on his wife, betraying his partner, and just being an all-around asshole. You know, the stuff we actually see him doing. But an eternity of hell seems pretty harsh just for that. So maybe he did commit these murders, but just has Silent Hill-style amnesia about it, though maybe not exactly in the way they're shown. I doubt his wife and daughter froze to death in their house, for example. It's hard to tell. They do say that the murderer is part of Joseph, but I'm not sure if that means that Joseph necessarily did everything we saw the murderer doing. I think it's more likely that the murderers were meant to just be purely symbolic. If Joseph himself committed the murders, it seems like they would have had a montage or something showing that. IMDb does point out one oddity. The first finger Joseph finds was before he opened the lament configuration, which doesn't make sense since hell didn't open for Joseph before that, so the finger couldn't have come from the child version of him. The only explanation I can give is that maybe the movie starts on a second loop and it just happens to be the first that Joseph remembers. Either that or the creators really screwed up, which would be weird since the rest of the movie was pretty solid. There's also something interesting about this and the next 3 sequels that I intentionally didn't mention before now because I wanted you all to at least give this movie a fair chance. They, didn't start off as Hellraiser movies. Dimension had some unused movie scripts floating around and they basically took them, rewrote them to include Pinhead, some Cenobites, and a lament configuration, and ding! Instant Hellraiser sequels. There's also a distinct lack of gore, especially compared to Bloodline. I suspect it's mainly due to budget constraints. Also, torture porn hadn't become mainstream yet. Since this movie came out in 2000 and the first Hostel and Saw movies didn't come out until 2004. Otherwise, the makers of these movies might have taken advantage of that subgenre. Just seems like Hellraiser and torture porn would be a good match. So yeah, there's a reason why this movie and the next 3 don't feel like Hellraiser movies. Originally, they weren't. But whatever. Like I keep saying, I think most of them are watchable. And now on to the Cenobites. Well, on one hand, they have great designs in this movie. On the other, they have so little screen time that it's hard to tell. So consider this me helping you to appreciate them. I'm gonna start with Torso, who could also be called Chatterer 3.0. This movie is one case where it's fun to read the Cenobite wiki and see how they padded the descriptions of some of these Cenobites. According to that, his creation was overseen by the original Chatterer, who made Torso in his own image and was his master. But after Chatterer was killed, Torso followed in his footsteps and joined Pinhead's group. I love that there's so much background given to this guy who has like 30 seconds of screen time in this movie. There was a line of action figures based on these Cenobites, so I'm guessing that most of this extra info comes from the back of the packaging. Either way, I dig his design. The most obvious feature, besides the Chatterer aspect, is that he's cut off somewhere around the middle of his ribcage. Also, kudos for using practical effects. He looks pretty convincing. Also, it resulted in some amusing behind-the-scenes pics. It's too bad we only see him from the front, though. There are some images floating around the internet of a maquette someone did, I think based on an earlier design that they didn't go with, that shows how grotesque he looks from the back, showing a few bones of vertebrae sticking out. Also, he has various symbols carved into his skin. I kinda like how he just crawls around near the Wire Twins' feet as if he's their pet. Speaking of which, the Wire Twins are the first case I can think of where a Cenobite represents some kind of symbolism. In this case, they represent Joseph's insatiable appetite for sex. Again, the Cenobite wiki tries to give them a backstory and tie them to the earlier movies by saying they're Leviathan's daughters of lust. In ancient times, they worshipped at the altar of beauty. The wiki also says that Angelique was a daughter of Leviathan, so I guess they're all sisters. Leviathan really needs to keep his kids in check. For what it's worth, I go back to some of what I said when I was talking about Angelique. They don't look like they were ever humans, so I can believe that they started off as demons of some kind. So I don't know how canon the whole Daughters of Leviathan thing is, but I accept it, at least as my own headcanon. Like Angelique, their outfits are made of glossy vinyl or PVC instead of leather like the other Cenobites, and are quite revealing. There's a big hole cut in the stomach area, revealing... Well, in the movie it's hard to see, but here it just looks like abdominal muscles. But in the action figures it looks like organs, which is kinda weird. Oh well. Their name comes from the wires that are attached to the neckline of the bodysuit, which are inserted into the bottom of the chin. Then they apparently continue under the skin, then through the eyelids, effectively stitching them shut, then back under the skin, continuing to the hairline where they come out again and gather at the top of the head, resembling a ponytail. That's pretty creative, if cringe-inducing. Other than that, they appear to have runes of some kind carved into their skin, the way Torso does, and each has a different symbol on the sides of the head. And of course there's that signature long black tongue that puts Gene Simmons to shame. Also, an early sketch shows that they were going to have pierced nipples, but the costumes had to be simplified due to budget constraints. Honestly, if you're gonna have a sexy female Cenobite, these two, along with Angelique, is how you do it. There's gotta be an interesting contrast between the sexy and the grotesque. That's what Cenobites are all about. You don't just stick pins in her head and throw a leather bikini on her and call it a day. If she's totally bangable without question, she's not a good Cenobite. Be ashamed, creators of the Hell Priestess figure. You failed. Well, that only leaves the faceless Cenobite, and there's not much to say about him design-wise. He has no eyes or nose, just a mouth where it looks like the lips have been removed, but other than that, his face is totally smooth, showing that he probably never had those features. And he also has the long black tongue like the Wire Twins. From the neck down, he just looks like a human with clothes. He doesn't even have an entry in the Cenobite wiki, though that might just be because he turns out to be Joseph wearing a metaphorical mask.
Welcome to hell.
And now on to Pinhead. Not too much of a change in design. He still has the pins with the rounded heads from Bloodline, but now it looks like the grid lines are deeper again, so they show up better. Also, the bloody parts on him are now a very dark red, where before they were a brighter red and they used to really pop against the black and white. It's not a big deal, but I kinda miss that. There's also something going on with his skin now. It has kind of a bumpy, leathery texture, and in some areas it looks a bit veiny. It makes him look even less human, which kind of works for his role in this movie, I think. Again, it's very small differences, just more than usual this time. And like I pointed out earlier, I like how somehow the lighting makes it look like the white parts on him are glowing. It looks weirdly angelic? Which reminds me, Pinhead's role is kind of different in this movie, but it also feels kind of familiar. In the first two movies, he's neither good nor evil, demon to some, angel to others, and was very businesslike about doing his job. In the third movie, he became blatantly evil down to the villainous laugh, and that just kind of continued in Bloodline. In this movie, he is back to being neutral, neither good nor evil, and just having a job to do. But his role is kind of different because he went from someone wanting to dole out pleasure and pain to, Hades? I don't know if that's the best example. Maybe Osiris? But basically, it seems that Pinhead's job is now to dole out punishments to bad people. And his name in this movie kind of alludes to that in a way. He's referred to as the Engineer. In the original novel, The Hellbound Heart, the Engineer was a Cenobite whose job it was to come up with punishments for people, so it's actually weirdly appropriate that Pinhead is being called that in this movie. Of course, in the first movie, this weird monster was called the Engineer, but not in dialogue, so it's kind of an unofficial name. So that's kind of confusing for fans. When I first saw this movie and they kept mentioning the Engineer, I kept waiting for that monster to show up again, and when it turns out it was Pinhead, I was like, what? But if you think back to the original novel, it does kind of make sense. Also, I'm not sure how I feel about the counselor being Pinhead that whole time. I loved it the first time I saw this movie because it caught me so off guard and it just blew my mind. But seeing it again, I'm not so sure anymore. It feels kind of random, and what about those scenes where the counselor was talking about having a wife and daughter and such? Like, was Pinhead just pulling all that out of his ass, like he just came up with a name and life story for this character he was playing? It feels like the counselor was always meant to be his own character, and his being Pinhead was added at the last minute. Which it probably was. Although the idea of James Remar playing Pinhead in a way kind of tickles me, like he's just doomed to always play characters that were already made famous by other actors. He is great in this movie, though. Anyway, if you can accept Pinhead as basically being Hades or Osiris, his role kind of works. I am at least glad that he's no longer some shallow villain, and he's been pushed back to almost a background player instead of having another installment of the Pinhead show. I've said this before, but it cannot be overstated. A little of Pinhead goes a long way. He is a compelling character and always a joy, but too much of him starts to kill that mystique that makes him so compelling in the first place. So kudos to this director for realizing that and putting it into practice. Though he admitted that he wishes he'd given Pinhead more screen time to make the fans happy. And with what little screen time he has in this movie, a little more actually couldn't have hurt. So I think that's about all I have to say about Hellraiser Inferno. Yes, it's got a lot going against it with Clive Barker having been left out and the movie going straight to DVD, but I think it's surprisingly good, all things considered. It's kind of like if Hellraiser, Silent Hill, and Groundhog Day had a three-way and this movie popped out. If you can get past Pinhead's role being changed a bit, the general lack of gore, and how the movie just feels very different from the previous movies, I'd say it's definitely worth a watch. And even though it's a bit campy, I like that whole film noir aspect. And if nothing else, we've still got Doug Bradley as Pinhead. Better enjoy it while we can. That's it for now. See you next time.
All the appetites you indulged. You have destroyed your own innocence.